Do you need to be at an instrument to write music? That's what we're going to talk about. Hey, I'm Isaac Schanno Johnson. If you don't know me, I'm a musician, composer, producer, and I make videos about all that fun stuff. Music composition, music production. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to see videos like this in the future. So do you need to be at the piano or the guitar or your computer or wherever you have an instrument as a reference to be able to write music? Now, I don't have perfect pitch. I know Charlie Puth does. I don't. Some of my friends do. I don't. But I don't always need to be at the piano to write music. And I don't think everybody needs to be at the piano to be able to write music. It can be very useful. It can be helpful. But it's not 100% necessary once you've gotten some techniques down. Being able to hear what you write is a necessity. If you're writing music and you can't hear it or don't know what it will sound like and can't imagine it, it might not be what you meant for it to be. But there's lots of music I've written that sounded exactly how I wanted it to sound, and I didn't write it all at the piano. I have a string quartet that I wrote that I didn't write all at the piano. I wrote a piece for orchestra when I was in college at Berkeley that I didn't write purely at the piano. And they sounded exactly how I wanted them to sound. How did I do that? Well, it's actually not as complicated as it sounds. It's an idea called audiation. Audiation is being able to hear stuff in your head. And after you practice a certain amount of this, you can get pretty good at it. Just naturally from dealing with music and trying to do it, right? I'm sure we could all imagine a song like Happy Birthday or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, something, and audiate it in our head. Imagine that song playing in your head. We could probably all do that for something, right? And that's the basic idea of what audiation is. So, main thing to get better at audiating is work on ear training. Specifically, work on sight singing and following along to sheet music. That's what helps me the most, is either using something like solfege, I got a video on that, I'll put it right here, or following along with sheet music and the music itself, so you can get an idea of what the notes look like and sound like. Now, I write music by hand a lot of the time, and I write it onto sheet music, onto notation, and personally that's what I like doing. So those are the things that I'm going to suggest to help. If you don't write music onto musical notation, then whatever method of writing that you're using, learn what those different things sound like. If you're writing guitar riffs, for example, learn what different guitar patterns and scales sound like. That's the main idea. Another thing that can help is learning some music theory. And I know it can be a lot to learn music theory, but learning some basic music theory about chord progressions, different scale degrees, different scales, all that stuff can be really useful. I've got a video on how to learn some Roman numeral analysis, which can be very useful when you're trying to learn how to hear and audiate chord progressions. I'll link that right up here. Some other things that can be helpful but are a little more involved is practice 2 different lines on your instrument. You play one and you sing one. That can be really hard to do because you're having to coordinate these 2 things that might not normally be interacting in that way. But it's a great thing to practice. I did that in college a lot. I remember in the practice rooms, I'd sit and play a line on piano and try and hum another line in some type of counterpoint. Often it was a Bach chorale or something. I would choose something that had counterpoint that's fairly easy to follow for me. So I'd choose 2 lines from a Bach chorale or something because I could normally get the hang of it and do it with some practice. Sight reading can actually help with this a lot because you get used to what different things sound like and what they'll feel like when you're playing them. For example, I play piano and guitar, and on piano and guitar, getting used to sight reading and feeling where the notes will be, even on guitar, feeling where the notes will be in a guitar solo, for example, I can kind of imagine what they'll sound like because I have that tactile reference to follow when I'm trying to imagine what everything will sound like. And another thing that I like to do when I'm composing music, especially if I know that I'm going to have to write it away from the piano, or it's just going to be too much of a pain to find a piano or to be able to hear everything, is I'll do something that one of my composition teachers called gathering your materials. And basically I will think of every single variation of the melodies and the information that I'm using and write them down and hear them and play them out. And this process can take a long time because, well, every single variation you'll never be able to do because there are infinite variations. But even getting a solid group of variations of something can take a long time. So I'll take, let's say, a melody, for example. I'll play it backwards. I'll play it upside down. So I'll play it retrograde and inversion. I'll also play it retrograde inversion, upside down and backwards. I'll also play it in different scales. So if it's a melody in, let's say, a major scale, I'll play it in Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Phrygian, Dorian, Locrian. Every single scale I can think of, I'll play it in those scales. I'll stretch it out so it takes twice as long. The notes are twice as long in value. I'll shorten it. I'll play it where every single note is equal value, like an ostinato. I'll take parts of it and play around with them in every single different context I can think of. That's what I'll do. So then I have this reference. When I need to be writing away from a piano, away from a guitar, away from an instrument where I can get a reference, I have these ideas of what they'll sound like. Now, I might not necessarily be thinking of them in the right key because I don't have perfect pitch, but I'll get an idea of relatively how everything will sound together. And then when I hear it played on an instrument, I'll be like, yeah, oh, okay, cool. That's what I was hoping to achieve with that idea. This can take a lot of practice, so please, if you try and do this stuff and you're like, I can't do this after a week, it'll take longer than a week. So give yourself some time, right? If you're practicing how to hear stuff in your head, start with simple melodies, sing them in solfege, hum them to yourself. And you can practice sight reading with this, right? Sing songs in solfege from just the sheet music. And get all this stuff together. Using orchestra scores can be a great idea, a great example to do, because you can look at a score and flip through it almost like a magazine and imagine what different parts will sound like and then listen to the recording. Now, if you've never done that before, you probably won't get it right the first time, which is fine, right? Like, you won't be good at it when you first start doing it because it's a hard skill to get at, hard skill to achieve. But with practice, you'll get better at it and you'll start to notice these patterns in music and you'll be like, oh, cool, I know what that sounds like. I know what this sounds like. All this stuff. You'll just get better at it the more you practice with it. So stick with it if it's hard to do it first, because it'll get easier and you'll get better at it the more you do it. It's something that feels really gratifying to be good at. Being able to look at a piece of music and get a general idea of what it's going to sound like, even if it's not exactly perfect, can feel really good. And it just gives you a comfort in knowing, okay, I know this much about the piece, I can play it, right? It's a good starting point. Last thing that I want to talk about with audiation is there's a video by Hal Gasper, and I'll see if I can find it, link in the description, about loudness. He's talking about somebody named George Kochavitsky and talking about having a vivid imagination and keeping the idea of the audiated version of the song in your head loud, right? It's a video of him talking to the piano and somebody asks him about audiation, and he says that this person, George Kochavitsky, would, rather than hearing a jazz solo in his head quietly, he would hear it as if it's screaming, as if it's yelling at him. And he demonstrates this in the video, which is kind of funny, but pointing out that you want it to be vivid. Every detail you want to try and hear. It's hard to do because hearing really detailed stuff is, well, detailed, so it takes time to figure out all of what those details are and be able to hear those details in your head. But try to hear it as detailed and as loud and as vividly as you can, because that will get you better at it. Rather than just hearing a general idea of what something sounds like, that's a good start. But once you're there, you should think, how can I make this more detailed? What exactly are these players doing? Are there any ornaments? Or are there any small inflections or dynamic changes in the music that I can add that I want to be hearing, right? What specific ways are they playing it? What parts are legato? What parts are staccato, right? Hear exactly what you want to hear and try and make it loud. That one's kind of weird and can be incredibly hard to do because normally you're just like, yeah, okay, I can hear it in my head. Fine, whatever. But try and hear it even louder so that it's really, really vivid. Something else with this is when you're trying to think about stuff like this, it can help you get better at ear training in some weird ways, right? You might be trying to hear a song in your head and write a song in your head, and you start to get better tuned into what different scale degrees of minor scale sound like, or whatever scale you're using. You can hear relationships between notes a little better, right? You'll start to hear things a little more clearly, a little more vividly, almost as if I'm somebody that wears glasses, obviously, and it can almost feel like you're hearing stuff without your glasses and then you put them on. If anybody wears glasses, you know what I mean. You have this weird sensation of, wow, this is what everything looks like. Oh my gosh. And that's kind of what happens when you get used to hearing stuff vividly and hearing stuff a little more with a little more detail and get better at that specific skill. It's almost like you're really focusing your ears to really be able to hear what's going on in the song, and is one of my favorite things about music, because the more detail you hear, the more interesting everything sounds, because then you're not just hearing these random things that are happening in the music and whatever, they're just happening. You're hearing exactly how they work and how they interact with other pieces of the music, and sometimes you can hear how they relate to other pieces of music that you've already heard before, which can just be a great thing to be able to do in helping you be able to appreciate more music and being able to more deeply appreciate the music that you already listen to. Okay, so that is it for that video about writing at the piano, and I hope you found that useful. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something about music. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.